The text came through on a Tuesday afternoon. 3 words. That's all it took to unravel years of effort, loyalty, and sacrifice. We all agreed you're not welcome at the wedding. At first, I thought it was a joke, maybe a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. The pit in my stomach confirmed it. My sister's wedding, the one I paid for, the one I planned, the one I'd been everything for, was happening without me. And as the shock settled in, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about me finally choosing myself. What happened next? Let's just say, I wasn't going down without a fight. Hey, I'm Kyle, and this is the story of how I went from being the family's emotional ATM to becoming the one who finally walked away. I've always been the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who put my family first, even when it meant giving up my own dreams. But when my sister decided I wasn't welcome at her wedding, after everything I did for her, well, I learned the hard way that loyalty has its limits. Before I dive in, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this story unfolds. It was a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that feels ordinary, unassuming, like any other day. I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through some work emails, when my phone buzzed. 3 simple words flashed across the screen. We all agreed. I stared at the message for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. It didn't even make sense. What did they agree on? What was this about? I leaned back in my chair, hoping my mind was playing tricks on me. It was like my gut was already bracing for something worse. I picked up my phone, heart starting to race, and my thumb swiped open the next message. You're not welcome at the wedding. That was it. No punctuation, no explanation, just a cold, formal sentence in my mom's typical tone. She used that dash when she wanted to sound official, like she was delivering news, not feeling anything. I blinked hard, rereading the message as if the words would somehow change if I just looked at them a little harder, but they didn't. My sister's wedding. The one I had been helping plan for months, the one I had helped fund, the one where I'd spent countless hours managing every detail while my sister Sarah was too stressed to even think straight, the one where I'd handled every argument, every hiccup, every meltdown she had, always being there because I thought that's what family does. I even wired over another $1 hour $500 for overpriced centerpieces because, let's face it, Pinterest threw up on a florist and it was my responsibility to fix it. I thought I was being helpful. I thought I was the family's rock, but apparently, I was wrong. My name's Kyle. I'm 31, and up until that moment, I thought I was doing something good, being the glue that held everything together, the reliable one, the one who had their back. I've always been the responsible one. Not rich by any means, but I worked in IT long enough to save a little here and there. I didn't live lavishly like most of them. I stayed single, lived modestly, didn't buy into the consumerist chaos the rest of the family thrived on. I thought that meant I was blessed, and they were just unlucky. Turns out, being the responsible one just makes you the family's ATM with no overdraft protection. You help because you're expected to, not because you're appreciated. They don't call you to say thanks when they need you. They call to ask for more, and you give it to them. Not because you're a sucker, but because you're convinced that if you just keep showing up, things will eventually get better, that maybe one day, someone would notice all the sacrifices you made. But that's not how it works. Not in my family. I stared at the text from my mom, that smug little dash taunting me. I didn't even respond. I didn't need to. I didn't have the energy to. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into the travel portal I'd used for the honeymoon flights, 2 round-trip business class tickets for Sarah and her fiancé, booked under my name. I clicked cancel. I watched the screen blink for a second before the $3 $800 refund notification popped up. The money would be back in my account in a few days, but that wasn't enough. No, I wasn't done yet. I opened my savings account and transferred $16,500, the exact amount I'd wired to my mom last month for what she called wedding overflow costs. I didn't say a word. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't text anyone back. I just watched the numbers move, my hands shaking slightly as they did. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just this strange, deep calm, like I'd been holding my breath for years and I had finally exhaled. I sat back and closed my eyes, letting the quiet hum of the moment sink in. No one had seen this coming, but I had. The silence on the other end of the phone, the lack of questions, the growing expectation that I'd keep bailing them out, something broke inside me. The first call came at 8:17 p.m. It was my sister. I let it ring. Then came my cousin, then my uncle, then my mom. The notifications just kept flooding in, one after another. I didn't even look at them. I turned the volume off and went about my night, reheating leftovers and watching a documentary on Netflix. Not that I actually watched it, I didn't absorb a single second of it. My mind was elsewhere, lost in the noise of what had just happened. By the time morning came, there were 23 missed calls, voicemails, a single message that made my hand go cold. "Please call me, it's Dad." That stopped me. My dad, he wasn't the kind to get involved in drama. He never was. A quiet man. The kind who'd rather tinker with a broken coffee maker than confront a family conflict. When I was a kid, I used to think he didn't care. But as I grew older, I realized it wasn't that he didn't care, he just picked his battles carefully. And for him to step into this one meant something was off. I was about to listen to the voicemail when it hit me. Maybe this wasn't just about the wedding, maybe there was more to it. I called him back. He picked up before the second ring. "Kyle." His voice was low, like he was trying to keep something private. "You got a minute?" I sat up, the blood in my veins going cold. Something in his tone told me this was serious. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound casual. "What's going on?" There was a long pause. I could hear the faint background noise of the television in the background, then the soft click of the volume button turning down. He cleared his throat before speaking again. "I didn't know they were going to do this. Son, your mom and your sister, I just found out this morning. After they locked down the seating chart and made the announcement in the family group chat." I frowned. I wasn't even in the group chat. "I know," he said quietly, "that's part of it." I felt a sudden tightening in my chest. What did he mean by that? Another pause. "Kyle, they told everyone you chose not to come." I couldn't speak, my stomach dropped. "They told the family you got upset over something minor, that you're being dramatic again, and that you decided not to attend." I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "So they kicked me out and made it sound like I was the one who chose not to come." I heard my dad sigh heavily. "They're telling everyone you threatened to ruin the wedding if you showed up." My mom said what? I felt like I was losing control of my own life. The people I'd been trying to help, the ones I'd been giving my time and money to, they were painting me as the villain, the scapegoat, the one who had ruined everything. It was a punch to the gut. "I know, son," Dad continued, his voice softer now, like he didn't want to admit it. "I know that's not who you are. I've seen you. I've watched you pick up every piece they dropped. You handled that entire engagement party, and no one thanked you. You paid off your mom's second credit card last summer without saying a word. You've been there for them every time, but they don't see it, or maybe they do, and it threatens them." I leaned against the kitchen counter, my hands shaking as I let the words sink in. This wasn't just about a wedding. This was about them never seeing me as anything more than their bank account. It was about them turning on me, making me the scapegoat, just because they didn't want to face their own shortcomings. I was done. I didn't say anything to Dad. I just stared at the kitchen counter, numb. I didn't feel anything anymore. No more anger, no more sadness, just this strange, unsettling calm. "Dad," I said, my voice low, "I wired them $6,500 for the honeymoon. I canceled the flights last night." He was silent on the other end for a moment. "Good," he finally said. "It's about time someone stood up to them." His support felt like a lifeline, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. No, the real revenge was just beginning. I don't know what I expected after I got off the phone with my dad. Maybe a flood of emotions, anger, rage, or even a sense of betrayal. but there was nothing. I felt calm. That's when I realized I wasn't mad at them anymore. I wasn't even sad. No, I was something else. Something cold, detached. For years, I'd been a cog in the family machine, always there, always working, always fixing. But now, I was stepping back. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their gratitude. They wanted me out. Fine, I would go, but they were going to feel it. They were going to know the consequences of their choices. They'd forgotten one thing. I was the one holding the strings. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop again, and logged into my bank accounts. First things first, I started with the small stuff, the bills I paid every month for my mom, the subscriptions I'd been covering for Sarah, the little things that no one ever acknowledged but were essential to their daily lives. The Costco membership I had with my mom canceled. She would never even notice until she went to buy groceries and the card didn't work. The Netflix, Hulu, and Disney Plus accounts they all used, gone. The auto payments I'd set up for Sarah's student loans, the utilities that had her name on them, all stopped. There was a strange sense of satisfaction in this, like each little piece of their life was slipping away from them, and I wasn't the one paying for it anymore. I wasn't the family ATM, and I wasn't going to keep letting them treat me like one. As I clicked through the cancellations and confirmations, I thought about how long I'd been doing this, how long I'd been covering for them, stepping in when they couldn't make rent or when they needed cash to pay for some new expensive endeavor that was clearly out of their reach. I remembered the summer I paid off my mom's second credit card without even being asked, just because she was about to max it out. I remembered the countless times Sarah asked for money because she wanted the perfect wedding, but I knew she was just too irresponsible to plan it on her own. In a way, it was my fault. I had let them do this to me, let them drain me dry because I thought I was doing something good, but no one ever sees the person who holds it all together. They just see the person who does. I'd never really been part of the family. I'd always been the one who picked up the pieces when things fell apart, but I was never invited to sit at the table. I was just the fixer, the invisible hand that made everything run smoothly. Well, not anymore. By the time I got to the wedding venue deposit, I felt a strange sense of power settle in. I knew exactly what I had to do. My name was on the contract for the venue. I was the primary holder, and they'd never paid me back for that check I'd written months ago. I clicked through the reservation options. Cancel, yes. Just like that, the deposit was forfeit. I smiled to myself for the first time since I'd received that text. It wasn't some wild, dramatic revenge. No big speech, no confrontation. Just me, quietly dismantling their plans, their wedding, their expectations of me. I didn't need to scream or shout. I just needed to walk away. And when I walked away, they would feel it. Every little detail, every little cost, every little thing they took for granted was gone. This wasn't about my ego. It wasn't about being right. This was about letting go. They wanted me out of their lives, but I was going to make sure they felt the consequences of their choices. And as I watched the email confirmation come through, the official cancellation of the venue reservation, I realized something: they hadn't just kicked me out of the wedding. They'd made me an outsider in my own family. I was just a pawn to them, a resource to be used until they didn't need me anymore. But now, the game had changed. The calls started coming again the next day. My sister Sarah's tone was different this time. I could hear the panic creeping into her voice. "Kyle, can we talk?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. Mom didn't mean it like that." "Okay." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. The truth was already out there, loud and clear, and there was nothing she could say that would change it. After Sarah's call, the messages started. "Please, Kyle, can we talk? I didn't mean to hurt you." Then my mom. Please, I'm sorry. Let's talk after the wedding, okay?" But I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I sat there, quiet and still, watching the screen flash with their desperate attempts to reach me. I'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. For years, they'd treated me like a tool to be used, but I was done. That evening, I decided to take it a step further. I opened a new folder on my desktop. Contributions from Kyle. I uploaded everything. Receipts, bank transfers, screenshots of texts and emails where I'd been asked for money, where I'd been asked to help with Sarah's wedding and everything else. I even included the original invoice from the engagement party that I had paid for when my mom conveniently forgot to reimburse me. Then I copied the link and sent it to everyone in the family group chat. I didn't write a single word. I didn't need to. I didn't need to explain anything. Within 5 minutes, I was out of the chat. They'd kicked me out, just like they always did when they didn't want to face the truth. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what came next. By Friday morning, just a day before the wedding, I woke up to an email from the groom's mother. Her name was Linda, kind, composed, and polite. I barely knew her, but she'd always seemed like the type to hold herself together no matter what. Her message was short, but it rattled me more than any voicemail or text message from my family ever could. Hi Kyle, I wanted to reach out directly. I've heard bits and pieces about what's going on, and frankly, I'm alarmed. If you have a moment, could we speak? I feel like I'm missing some very important information. That was it. The polite words had a sharp edge to them. I didn't know what it meant, but I felt like I needed to respond. I called her. She answered immediately. Thank you for calling, she said, her voice formal but with an edge of concern. I don't mean to overstep, but my son just informed me that the venue may have been canceled. It was, I said plainly. I paid the deposit. It was under my name. There was a pause, then she spoke again, more carefully this time. That's not what we were told, she said, her voice strained. We were told you'd backed out, that you were upset, bitter. I wasn't about to let them paint me as the villain. I took a breath, steadying myself, before answering. Do bitter people usually pay for floral arrangements, the wedding cake, the DJ, and half the venue? There was silence on the other end for a long moment. Then Linda's voice softened. I understand now, but, Kyle, there's something you should know. Sarah opened a joint credit card with your mom last week, and she used your name on the application. My chest tightened. They forged my name, I asked, unable to hide the disbelief in my voice. Linda's response was quiet but firm. I'm afraid so. We've looked into it, and the charges are already being reviewed. At that moment, I felt something break inside me. This wasn't just about them manipulating me. It wasn't just about money. This was fraud. They had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. And that was when I knew I was done. The silence that followed Linda's revelation felt like a heavy weight pressing down on me. The fact that my family had gone so far as to forge my name on a credit card application made me see everything differently. They didn't just see me as a walking ATM, they saw me as someone they could use without consequence. For the first time in years, I felt something stirring within me that I hadn't realized was missing self-respect, and that respect wasn't just for myself, it was for the person I'd become, the one who was finally starting to break free from the hold they'd had over me. I spent the next few hours in a haze of cold, precise planning. There was no room for emotional chaos, no room for the anger or hurt I'd been feeling for months, maybe even years. It was time to move past that. I was done playing their game. This was no longer about me trying to gain their approval. It was about making sure they felt the weight of their actions. First, I opened my phone and logged into my online banking. The balance was healthy now, but it wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't even about the wedding. It was about taking back control, about showing my family that I was more than their punching bag, more than their fixer. I pulled up a list of all the financial commitments I had made for them over the years, the ones they took for granted, the bills I paid without question, the loans I'd covered, the things they never even bothered to thank me for. The first step was to make sure I never had to be the one to step in again. I started with my mom's cell phone plan. I'd been covering it since 2019, ever since she'd lost her job and couldn't afford it. I knew she'd never notice until she tried to make a call during her hair trial for the wedding. But that was exactly the point. She wasn't going to know until it was too late. I clicked suspend on her plan and smiled to myself. Then, I moved on to the Spotify family plan. I'd been paying for that, too, without even a thank you. But it wasn't just the convenience of their music accounts. It was the idea that I'd always been there to foot the bill. I logged in and removed everyone from the plan. That should sting. I thought they wouldn't realize it until the next time they tried to play a song and got the error message, account suspended. There were other things, too. Sarah's student loans, which I had agreed to help pay off when she couldn't manage her debt done. I disabled the automatic payments, effectively freezing any more funds I'd been sending. I knew that would send her into a panic, but that was the point. For once, it felt good to be the one with the power. Then came the big one. I had wired the $1,600 for Sarah's wedding venue months ago. They hadn't paid me back a single cent, but I never expected them to. After all, it was always just about me making things happen. I thought about how I had bent over backward to make sure this wedding, which was supposedly her dream, actually came together. But now, all I was to them was a shadow in the background, the one who paid the bills and kept everything running. I opened the email confirmation I had received about the venue cancellation, the one where the wedding was officially no longer confirmed. The feeling of relief was almost too overwhelming to describe. It wasn't about the money, it was about watching everything unravel. It was about the fact that they had pushed me to the point where I was finally saying, no more. I didn't even have to confront them directly. They'd done the work for me. The next day, I started receiving messages, not just from Sarah, but from a few extended family members. They were all reaching out, asking what happened, what went wrong, but it was too late. The damage had been done, and I wasn't going to play their game anymore. Sarah's first message came in like clockwork, but it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't filled with the usual passive-aggressive tone, the same old guilt trips, or the deflection of responsibility. It was panic. Kyle, it started. Can we talk, please? I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. Mom didn't mean to exclude you from the wedding. I let it sit there for a while. The fact that she was suddenly trying to patch things up after everything she'd said, it didn't even register. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about them scrambling, trying to fix the mess they'd made. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. But when the second message came, the tone had shifted completely. It was more frantic, more pleading. Kyle, please, this isn't about you. We just need to work through this. The wedding is falling apart without you. And that's when it clicked. It wasn't about the wedding. It was never about the wedding. It was about their narrative. They needed to blame someone, and I was the one they'd chosen. They were trying to rewrite history. They wanted me to be the villain in their perfect little story. They wanted to pretend I wasn't the one holding everything together for years while they all threw their lives into chaos. So, I let them have their story. But I wasn't going to be a part of it. The following days were a blur of messages, phone calls, and frantic voicemails, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth was already out there, hanging over everything like an inescapable cloud. They had underestimated me, and now they were scrambling to fix what they'd broken, but there was no fixing it. Not this time. By the time Thursday afternoon rolled around, I'd had enough. It was no longer about me getting closure or feeling justified. It was about them finally seeing how far they'd pushed me. They wanted me to disappear. Fine. I'd make sure they felt my absence in ways they couldn't ignore. Sarah's constant messages were a reminder of how much she had underestimated me. Kyle, please, we need you. We need to fix this before it's too late. I ignored them all. I didn't care that she was panicking. I didn't care that she was upset. She wasn't the one who had to deal with this family's mess every day. She wasn't the one who had always been left holding the bag while everyone else got to play victim or do whatever they wanted. I was the one who always picked up the slack, always bailed them out, always cleaned up their messes, but not anymore. Not this time. Friday. The day before the wedding. It came with an unexpected twist. I was sitting in my apartment, having just finished a long day of work when my phone buzzed with an incoming email. The subject line stopped me cold. Urgent, your cancellation has caused confusion with the venue. It was from the venue manager, confirming the cancellation of the booking under my name. They had received my request, and because they hadn't received a replacement booking, the deposit was forfeited. They also made a note that no alternative arrangements had been made, leaving the event in limbo. So they were essentially putting the blame on me. I took a deep breath. Reading through the email again, it wasn't that I felt any guilt, it was just a strange sense of satisfaction. Everything they'd planned was falling apart without my money, my input, my work. They had tried to kick me out of their lives, to erase me, but now they were scrambling to pick up the pieces. I didn't need to lift a finger. The mess they created was already unraveling without me. I couldn't help but think they made me the villain, but this wasn't a movie, and I wasn't going to give them the chance to spin this into something it wasn't. The phone started ringing again. This time, it was my dad. It wasn't like him to call, especially after everything that had happened, but something in his voice when he answered caught my attention. Kyle, I need to talk to you. It's about the wedding. I could hear him struggling, his voice low and reluctant. I think you need to know some things. I stayed silent for a moment. My dad wasn't the type to get caught up in family drama, but I knew him well enough to understand when he was trying to shield me from something. The way he said it, his hesitation felt like a warning. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They've been telling people. He paused, a heavy sigh on the other end. They've been telling people that you're just being dramatic, that you're acting out. They're saying you're jealous of Sarah and that you didn't want to be a part of the wedding because you couldn't stand seeing her happy. My jaw clenched, the audacity. To lie about me, to twist the truth like this. It wasn't about Sarah's happiness, it wasn't even about the wedding. It was about respect, about them taking me for granted for so long, and finally, about me standing up for myself. But of course, they were too blind to see that. It was easier for them to play the victim, to paint me as the villain, than to take responsibility for their own actions. I didn't make this about me, I said, trying to keep my calm, but they sure as hell did. Dad sighed again, clearly conflicted. I could almost hear him looking for the right words. I know, son, he said quietly, but it's getting ugly. Your mom and Sarah, they're telling people that you refused to fund the honeymoon because you were upset. They've even started telling people you threatened to ruin the wedding if you came. I felt something cold rush over me, but threatened. It was like I was being erased from my own life. They were painting me as the antagonist in a story I didn't even want to be a part of. This isn't about the money, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and rage. This is about them treating me like I don't matter, like I'm just their personal bank account. I heard a soft click on the other end. It was like Dad was putting something down, trying to give me space to breathe. I'm sorry, he said, his voice quiet. I've been watching this happen for a long time, but I don't know how to fix it. All I can tell you is that you did the right thing. That was the first time in a long time I had heard him say that you did the right thing. It was the validation I didn't know I needed. For once, I wasn't alone in this. He saw me. He saw the truth. The next few hours passed in a blur. It was like my family was unraveling before my eyes. The calls started escalating. Sarah's tone shifted completely. She was no longer just passive-aggressive, she was desperate. I can't believe you did this, she texted. We've been telling everyone you were being unreasonable, but now they're asking questions. You're ruining everything. It was too late. I didn't need to explain myself to her. I didn't need to apologize for taking back control of my life. This was no longer about them. This was about me finally choosing myself. I spent the next couple of hours sitting in my apartment, my fingers hovering over my phone as I debated whether or not to respond. But the truth was, I didn't need to. I was done. They could continue blaming me. They could continue their narrative, but I knew the truth, and that's all that mattered. The wedding never happened. I watched the drama unfold from a distance. The venue cancellation was the final nail in the coffin. There was no way to recover from that. They scrambled to salvage what they could. Some guests turned around mid-flight. Others never made it at all. The groom's family, when they found out about the forged credit card, pulled the plug on everything. The whole thing fell apart. By the time I got the final message from Mom a few days later, I had already moved on. "You've made your point. We're all hurting. You didn't have to go this far." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I made one final move. I changed my number. And with that, I was free. The days after I changed my number were oddly peaceful. It felt surreal, almost like I had stepped out of a nightmare and into the quiet of my own life. The chaos my family had tried to drag me into was no longer my problem. No more fake apologies, no more phone calls asking for money, no more guilt trips or passive-aggressive comments. I didn't need to be the fixer anymore. I was free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't tied to them by obligations or expectations. I could breathe without feeling suffocated. But as I let the silence stretch on, something else lingered in the back of my mind. What was the cost of all this? The fallout had been swift. It wasn't just the wedding that fell apart. It was everything they had built on top of me, the lies, the manipulations, the financial dependence. The second they lost me, they lost their foundation. I didn't hear from Sarah directly again after I changed my number, but I did hear from others' relatives who had been dragged into their drama. They were confused, angry, some even tried to guilt trip me. "I don't know what happened, but they're really hurting." Aunt Cheryl wrote in one of her desperate messages, "This isn't like you, Kyle." But the truth was, this was like me, the person they never noticed, the one who had been shoved to the edges, always expected to clean up the messes. And now that I wasn't doing that anymore, they couldn't handle it. They wanted me back, but it wasn't going to happen. What really struck me was the irony of it all. They had been the ones who cut me out of their lives, who made me the villain in their twisted narrative. But when they needed me, when the very foundation of their existence cracked, suddenly I was the one they were calling. Suddenly, they were hurting, and they expected me to feel bad about it. It wasn't my problem. Weeks went by, and life moved forward in ways I didn't expect. Without the constant weight of my family's demands, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. It was like my vision had cleared, and I could see myself for who I truly was. Not just the role I'd played for them. I could focus on my own goals, my own happiness. I started traveling more. I took the vacation I'd always put off. I treated myself to things I'd never allowed myself to buy because I thought I had to save for everyone else. There was one thing that lingered, though: the sense of vindication. It wasn't just about canceling the wedding or freezing their lives financially. It wasn't about making them pay for their lies. It was about taking control of my own narrative. For once, I wasn't just the one who did all the hard work, who got nothing in return. I wasn't the invisible one anymore. I realized that all this time, I had been giving them power over me. I thought if I just kept showing up, if I kept doing the right thing, eventually they would see me. But what they really saw was someone they could use, someone they could control. That's when I started to think about the last piece of the puzzle. The final twist came unexpectedly, but when it did, I knew it was the right time. The last thing I had been holding on to was the honeymoon suite reservation I'd made for Sarah and her fiancé in Cabo. They hadn't even thanked me for it. They didn't even know I had booked it under my name. But I did. I had reserved the luxury suite. I had made sure they would have the perfect honeymoon. Except, of course, I wasn't going to let them go there. When I initially booked the reservation, I had looked at the cancellation policies and the fine print. Since the wedding had been canceled and the venue was no longer holding their reservation, I knew I had the power to change things. The hotel had a strict cancellation policy, but it was also a transferable reservation. They could rebook at any time, as long as they paid. But I had no intention of letting that happen. I logged into the resort website and changed the dates. I upgraded the suite. I even added the champagne package and a few extra amenities to make sure they were taken care of in my own way. When I got the confirmation email, I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just that I was taking the honeymoon from them. It was the fact that I was taking their fantasy and flipping it on its head. They had taken from me for years now. It was my turn. The final touch was simple. I forwarded the email to Sarah and my mom, along with a brief message. I know you two were looking forward to your honeymoon. Enjoy the changes I've made. I hope it's everything you dreamed of. Sincerely, Kyle. By the time the fallout reached its peak, my family had completely imploded. Sarah had tried to make excuses. Mom called in tears, begging me to reconsider. She was devastated by what I'd done, but I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. It wasn't about making them feel guilty. It was about reclaiming my own life, about giving myself the space to be free from the toxic cycle they had put me in. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their forgiveness. I wasn't a pawn in their game anymore. What struck me most, though, was the slow realization from the people who had been closest to me. They had always assumed I would come running back when they needed me. They had always thought I would bend over backwards to fix things. But when I didn't, when I stood my ground, everything they had built crumbled. The calls didn't stop coming, but I didn't pick up. The messages didn't stop, but I deleted them without a second thought. I wasn't running back to them. I wasn't going to let them pull me back into their toxic world. About a week later, I woke up to the familiar sound of my phone buzzing. This time, it wasn't a call or a text, it was an Instagram story. I opened it, and there she was, Sarah, in front of the empty wedding venue, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. She was posting cryptic quotes, passive-aggressive rants about betrayal, and making vague allusions to people who ruined everything. But this time, it didn't sting. This time, I just clicked away. I had nothing to prove anymore. And when my dad finally reached out weeks after everything had fallen apart, he simply said, "You did the right thing." For the first time in my life, I finally felt the sense of freedom I'd always craved. I wasn't trying to fix anyone. I wasn't trying to earn anyone's love. I was just me, 31 years old, finally free and ready to move on with my life. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I had me, and that was enough. Story 2. Growing up. Our family was the model of perfection. A house with freshly trimmed lawns, holiday cards with matching sweaters, and two seemingly perfect parents, Claire and Everett. My little sister, Ivy, was the golden child. Everything she did was in achievement debates, grades, social life. She was the star, and I was the shadow, standing on the sidelines, watching. I didn't mind at first. Well, maybe I did, but I figured that was just how it went. After all, Ivy was smart, Ivy was charming, and I was just Issa. I didn't need accolades. I didn't need applause. All I needed was time. But time was something my parents never gave me. They invested in Ivy's future with enthusiasm. Her Ivy League dreams were bankrolled without hesitation. As for me, you'll figure it out, they'd say, as if my dreams were insignificant. The first real sting came when we talked about college. Ivy was accepted into her dream school, and my parents were beaming. But when I quietly asked, "What about me?" the silence that followed spoke volumes. "We only have enough for one," Dad said, his voice clinical. "Ivy has more potential." That sentence rang in my ears for weeks, but there was something else in those words. Something that started a fire in me, a fire that would burn quietly. At first, but would eventually change everything. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. I didn't need their validation. I would build my own future, on my own terms. That summer, I packed up and went to my grandmother's cabin. Grandma Ruth was the only person who truly saw me. While Ivy got every trophy, every scholarship, Grandma saw my quiet efforts. "You've got a mind that solves from the side," she once told me, and that's what I did. I solved things, quietly, without fanfare. With Grandma's support, I worked out a plan: scholarships, grants, loans, anything and everything that would get me to my dream school without depending on them. I didn't need them to believe in me. I only needed me to believe in myself. The first year of college felt like a blur. I was always tired, but tired in that way that you almost couldn't feel anymore. Mornings started before the sun was up, with hours of studying, then a shift at the coffee shop, between classes. I'd rush to my second job, shelving books at the local used bookstore. Every decision, every hour of my day was meticulously calculated. It was survival, but it was also more than that. This was my shot. Ivy, on the other hand, posted glossy photos of herself, perfectly arranged in dorms, with new gadgets, new friends, and weekends spent at campus parties. Her life looked effortless, but all I could see was how far apart our worlds had drifted. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to work, only to find Ivy brunching with mom and dad on campus visits. She was living the dream they'd promised me, but only if I had been good enough like her. I couldn't help but wonder if they ever saw me as more than the backup plan. Was I just the one who figured it out when no one else believed? Was that my role in this family? To quietly shoulder every weight and move through life with no applause? Then, in the middle of that first semester, something changed. One night, I was alone in the library, lost in a sea of textbooks and empty coffee cups. The weight of the world felt heavier than usual, but then I saw an ad for a startup competition, something called the National Collegiate Business Innovation Prize. The more I read, the more I felt the spark that had always been buried deep within me, waiting to catch fire. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. I didn't have a team, I didn't have funding, but I had ideas. I had the late nights at Grandma's cabin, scribbling down plans no one took seriously, and I wasn't about to let that stop me. I started a business, a small one at first, nothing more than a virtual assistant service for local businesses. I called it Marentask, my last name, my legacy. Building a website with free templates, crafting service packages, and hustling in local Facebook groups was not glamorous, but it was real. It was mine. I did everything by myself, taught myself coding, marketing, customer service, anything that kept the lights on, and soon enough, I landed my first clients, a small flower shop needing help with online orders and a local law office buried under missed emails. But the real turning point came from someone I least expected, my roommate, June. June was the type of person who noticed without needing to say much. She saw me barely sleeping, skipping meals to finish work, and ignoring my own health to stay afloat. One evening, she casually knocked on my door with a bowl of pasta in hand. "You can't keep doing this," she said, sitting down next to me. "Eat." At first, I was defensive. I didn't need pity. I didn't want anyone to see the cracks, but she didn't push me. She just quietly started batch cooking meals, keeping them in the fridge for me. She'd check in on me, offering help without ever asking for anything in return. She was a true friend. No drama, no expectations, just support. It was June who helped me see that I didn't have to do everything alone, but it was also June who helped me realize something far deeper. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. As the months passed, my business grew, slowly but steadily. Clients came in drips and drabs. I built systems, refined my processes, and, in time, began to land bigger clients. By the end of the semester, I had enough income to cut back on one of my part-time jobs and focus on Marentask full-time. But the real kicker, the Dean's List honors. I had been so consumed by my work and survival that I hadn't noticed how much I was excelling in my courses. One afternoon, Dr. Weathers, one of my professors, stopped me after class. Her voice was quiet but certain. "Isa, your business analysis, it's exceptional. Ever consider entrepreneurship?" The word hit me like a thunderclap. Entrepreneurship. It wasn't just a buzzword anymore, it was my future. By the time finals week rolled around, I had 4 steady clients, a growing business, and the highest grades in my class. The exhaustion was still there, but it didn't feel the same. Now, it was a weight I wore proudly, and I was finally starting to believe in the quiet power that had been slowly growing within me. Then came the moment that would change everything. It was graduation day. The air was crisp, the sky unnaturally blue, but there was something cold beneath the surface. a reminder that this was the moment where everything I had fought for was about to be laid bare. As I stood in the back of the auditorium, preparing to walk across the stage, I caught a glimpse of my family in the front row, mom and dad, their faces frozen in that perfect smile they had always shown to the world, but their eyes, they were wide with confusion. They hadn't expected me to make it this far. They hadn't expected me to be more than the quiet daughter who always figured things out. But now, as I walked across that stage, the crowd erupted. The applause wasn't for Ivy or the other perfect students. It was for me, my journey, my resilience. The story they had never seen was finally being told, and they couldn't look away. When I reached the podium, I was handed my degree and a microphone. For a split second, everything went quiet, and then I spoke. My name is Issa Moren, and 4 years ago, I stood here, alone, in a family that never believed in me. But today, I stand in front of you, not because of them, but in spite of them. There were gasps from the crowd. A few eyes darted to my parents, whose faces were now as pale as the stage lights. The people who were supposed to support me, I continued, couldn't even be bothered to send a text when I graduated. But I did it anyway. I built this, not because I was given a chance, but because I fought for it. I had to. The room was buzzing with energy now, but before I could leave the stage, the dean announced something that made the room fall into a stunned silence. In addition to her achievements, Issa Moren has built a business now valued at 6 figures. She has won the National Collegiate Business Innovation Prize and will be joining one of the top strategy firms in the country. The applause that followed was deafening, but it wasn't just for me. It was for everything they had never believed I could be. And when I turned back, my mother's face was pale, and my father's mouth hung open. They didn't know what to say, but I didn't need their approval anymore. As I walked back to my seat, Ivy caught my hand. "You just changed the story," she whispered, "and they'll never be able to rewrite it again." I smiled softly. "No, Ivy, they won't." The applause continued, but inside, I knew this wasn't just about proving them wrong. This was about proving myself right. Graduation was a turning point, but it wasn't the end of the story. No, that day was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life. A chapter where the people who had always overlooked me would finally have to face the reality of who I had become. The applause, the awards, the recognition, it was all just a part of the bigger picture. The moment when I stood at the podium, speaking truths they had tried so hard to ignore, was only the first step. The real revenge wasn't in the public humiliation. Though, it wasn't about their shock or the gasps from the crowd. No, the real revenge was in what came after the moments that followed. The way I would live my life on my own terms from that moment forward. I could see them, my parents, sitting in the front row of the auditorium, stunned by the applause. Their smiles were stiff, forced. I could almost hear their internal monologue. How did she do it? How did she get here without us? They never thought I could make it. They always saw Ivy as the one worth investing in, the one who deserved the resources, the attention, the financial backing. But I'd made it anyway, without them, without their approval. And that's what truly stung. As I stepped off the stage, I didn't rush to find them. I let them find me. They stood awkwardly near the campus fountain, surrounded by well-meaning relatives who now knew exactly what they'd failed to see in me all these years. The sudden realization hit them. Hard. My father spoke first, his voice overly cheerful as if trying to smooth over the years of neglect. "Well, that was quite a surprise," he said, the words too casual, too rehearsed. "You've really been keeping busy." I didn't smile. I didn't thank him for the compliment. I just stared back, calm and composed. "You could have seen it coming," I replied, my voice steady, "but you chose not to." I didn't expect an apology. I wasn't waiting for one. They never thought I was capable of greatness, and yet, there I was. They were now faced with the truth. It wasn't just that I'd succeeded in spite of them, it was that I'd succeeded without them, and I was doing just fine. But then came the moment that would seal everything. After the ceremony, I walked away from them. Slowly, I felt no anger, just a quiet sense of closure. Ivy, my sister, came running up behind me. She was radiant, her eyes wide with admiration and perhaps just a little guilt. "You did it," she said softly, almost as though she couldn't believe it herself. "You really did it, Issa." I stopped walking and turned to face her, my eyes steady. You know, for the longest time, I thought I needed their approval. I thought I needed them to believe in me for any of this to be real. But what I've learned is, I don't. Ivy seemed to absorb the words, her face shifting as if she were processing something far deeper than she let on. She nodded slowly, understanding finally dawning on her. "I've learned that I don't need their validation." I continued, "I never did." I didn't say it to hurt her, but I said it because I meant it. Because in the end, the only person whose approval mattered was mine. I walked away then, not angrily, but with a quiet sense of power. It was the power of independence, the power of knowing that I had built this my success, my life on my own terms, and the truth was, nothing they could say or do would ever take that from me. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet victories. I moved into my new apartment, one I'd paid for with my own savings. I began my new job at one of the top strategy firms. Just as the university had announced, the transition from student to professional felt surreal, but I embraced it fully. I had made it, and I didn't need anyone to remind me of that fact. But as my life moved forward, so did theirs. I received a message from my mother one evening. It was a simple text, but it felt heavy with unspoken words. "I hope you're doing well. Issa, we've been thinking about you." For a split second, I considered replying, maybe with something warm, something that would make her feel like everything was fine. But then I remembered, I didn't need to be kind for the sake of their comfort. I didn't need to make them feel okay with the fact that I had grown beyond them. Instead, I left the message unread. I wasn't punishing them. I was just letting the silence speak for itself. A few days later, Ivy called me. She was more subdued than usual, her voice quieter. "Mom and Dad are struggling," she admitted, a little hesitantly. "They've been asking me for help." It was a blow, not because I felt bad, not because I was heartless, but because I knew what it meant. They were in financial trouble, and it wasn't the kind of trouble they could fix by asking for another loan or another small favor from me. They had always seen me as the dependable one, the one who would always pick up the slack, but now they were facing the consequences of their choices. I paused for a moment, gathering my thoughts. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, my voice calm but firm, "but I'm not in a position to help anymore." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Ivy didn't respond immediately, and I could almost hear her processing my words. "I get it," she said eventually. "You've worked hard for everything you have now." "Exactly," I replied, the truth ringing clear. I didn't get here by depending on others, and I'm not going to start now. The months that followed brought even more change. My business, Task, continued to thrive, now growing beyond just local clients. I had enough clients to hire an assistant, which gave me the freedom to scale up and explore new business opportunities. But more than that, I realized how far I had come, how far I had built myself, brick by brick, from nothing. And then came the final blow to my parents' fragile ego. One morning, I received a formal letter from the university. It wasn't just any letter. It was an announcement of a new scholarship that would be named after me. The ULA Marine Resilience Scholarship, a fund created for students who faced significant hardship but managed to succeed. Just like I had. The moment I opened that letter, I smiled. They thought they had cast me aside, that I was the one who would fall through the cracks. But no, not only had I succeeded, I was now part of something that would ensure other students, the ones who had been overlooked like me, would have a shot at success. I was officially a legacy, now not the one my parents had imagined for me, but one I had created myself. A few weeks later, I met up with Grandma Ruth for lunch. She was the only one who had believed in me all along. And as I sat across from her, I felt the warmth of the success we had both known would come. "Look at you, Issa," she said, smiling through her wrinkles. "You did it, and you did it your way." "Yeah," I said with a grin, "I did." And in that moment, I realized something that would stay with me forever. The true revenge isn't in the loud, public fights or the grand gestures of defiance. It's in the quiet success, in the life you build that no one can take away. That's the real power. And now, my family would have to explain me to everyone else, because I was no longer the afterthought. I was the one everyone would be looking up to. And honestly, they had no choice but to watch. Story 3. I'm Sabine Alden, 30 years old, an environmental consultant. Up until that dinner, I was the daughter who never caused trouble, the quiet one who always played along. But that Sunday night, everything changed. I showed up to family dinner with a bottle of red wine and a polite smile, ready to endure another hour of lukewarm roast and recycled small talk. What I didn't expect was my father, leaning back in his chair, carving into a steak like it was business as usual, casually announcing, "Tessa will be moving into your apartment next weekend." Not asking, not suggesting, just declaring. I almost laughed. Almost. But then I looked around the table and saw my mother already checking her calendar, and Tessa, my younger sister, sipping her wine like this had all been worked out days ago. That's when I knew they weren't waiting for my opinion. The apartment I'd spent 5 years saving for, the space that had become my sanctuary, was no longer mine. They had just handed it over to Tessa, like it was their right to do so. I looked at my father, who had already moved on to discussing his golf game with my brother, as if what he'd just said hadn't even been a conversation starter. Tessa didn't even look up from her phone. My mother nodded, confirming the plan. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a request. This was their decision, and I was expected to comply. I wasn't a child anymore, though I'd learned that my silence, my obedience, had always been mistaken for compliance, but not this time. Not when the very place that had become a symbol of my independence, my hard-earned peace, was being given away without my consent. This time I had a plan of my own. The subtle architecture of favoritism. I was the middle child in a family that claimed to not play favorites, but everyone knew better. Tessa, my younger sister by 4 years, was the golden one, bright, bubbly, effortlessly adored. She'd never had to work hard for anything. My parents funded her college art shows, cleaned up after her failed business ventures, and believed every one of her excuses for not being able to take care of herself. Meanwhile, I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college. I drove the same dented Toyota Corolla for nearly a decade. I was the independent one, the one who didn't need help like it was a compliment. What they really meant was, "You don't need us, so we won't show up." The apartment in the Pearl District was more than just an address for me. It was a symbol of my success. It was the one thing I could point to and say, "I did this." The first time I walked through that front door, I felt a quiet victory. Brick walls, sunlit floors, it was mine. Not because I'd been given it, but because I had worked for it. Tessa, on the other hand, treated stability like a pit stop after every breakup. She'd show up at our parents' house, tear-streaked cheeks and duffel bags in tow, and they'd hand her the keys to a guest room. A new beginning. She would stay there until the next man failed her, and then she'd repeat the cycle. I remember once when I needed emergency housing after a pipe burst in my first apartment, Tessa told me her guest room was off limits because it was being used for art storage. My parents didn't offer to help either. That was the pattern: Sabine, the solver; Tessa, the saved. But something had shifted inside me. Over the past few years, I had been working hard to untangle my emotions. I had been learning how to stop confusing peacekeeping with self-respect. Saying no was becoming easier, little by little. So when I declined to host Thanksgiving last year, my mother made a comment about how strange it was that I wouldn't uphold family traditions. But I did it anyway. I was starting to breathe without asking for permission. Still, I kept the monthly dinners. They were my last olive branch, 90 minutes of conversation and eye contact, just enough to avoid being labeled the ungrateful one. But this dinner was different. This dinner would break the pattern. I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. It was a small rebellion, barely noticeable to anyone but me. My mother greeted me with a stiff hug, a pointed glance at the clock. My father immediately started discussing Portland traffic as if I'd been gone for months, not just running late by design. Tessa was already lounging on the couch, as though she owned the place, sipping her wine and scrolling on her phone. Her boots, probably worth more than my month's rent, sat neatly next to the couch. She didn't even look up. Dinner began like every other. My father monopolized the conversation, speaking about politics and market trends, while my mother fished for updates on my life. Though really, she was just waiting for me to discuss neighbors' remodeling plans. I offered my usual sanitized report about work, keeping it bland enough to avoid criticism, but not so bland they'd accuse me of withholding. But then, my father cleared his throat. That was the signal. "Tessa has some news," he said, glancing at her like a proud MC introducing a headline act. She looked up from her phone, giving a perfectly timed sigh. "Jason and I broke up," she said. Jason, of course, the crypto bro with an opinion about everything and empathy for nothing. I had met him once, and the entire evening he spent explaining why government regulation was a scam. Tessa, ever the victim, leaned into her narrative. "It's just not fair," she added, her voice dripping with performative exhaustion. My mother reached across the table to squeeze her hand. Already sympathetic, she shouldn't have to go through this on top of heartbreak. I nodded, mostly to keep things moving, but then came the twist. "So, we figured it out," my father said, his voice measured, slicing into his steak with the precision of a judge delivering a verdict. "Tessa will move into your place for now." My heart stopped. I looked around the table. My mother was already planning aloud. "You work late anyway, and there's that spare room. We can move her stuff next Saturday." The steak in my mouth turned to sand. I had been living there for 2 years, and they were planning to dismantle my space without even asking. The tightness in my chest returned, the one I knew too well, the one that came every time I was expected to bend. "I actually use that room," I said, keeping my voice even. "It's my office." "You can work at the kitchen table," Tessa said with a laugh, dismissing it like it was no big deal. "That's just temporary," my father added, leaning back with a satisfied grin. "Family helps family." Those words hit me like a punch. Family helps family. Unless you need help, unless you're the one asking. I took a deep breath. "I'll need to check my lease about long-term guests," I said, smiling like it didn't cost me something. But it was too late. The pattern had already been set. They had already assumed I would bend to their will. After dinner, I helped clear the dishes, but my mind was already moving. For the first time, I wasn't rehearsing how to explain myself. I was planning my escape. That night, I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I didn't call a friend. I made tea, turned on the lamp beside my reading chair, and opened my lease. Page 12, subletting prohibited without prior written approval. Guests staying more than 14 consecutive days require background checks and must be added to the lease. I wasn't going to ask permission. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I was fully aware of my own power, not the kind that screams for attention, but the kind that works quietly, with precision and purpose, the kind that takes its time, watches, plans, and then strikes with quiet, deliberate force. That night, after dinner, I didn't feel the anger I expected. No, what I felt was something else, a calm, a sense of finality. I didn't need to explain myself, apologize, or defend my choices. They'd already made their assumptions about me, but I was done. I sat down at my desk and pulled out my phone. I needed to act quickly. The first thing I did was contact Blake, a colleague from another firm. We'd been acquaintances for a while, sharp, quiet, recently divorced. He was currently staying in a temporary rental while his condo was being repaired. A week ago, he'd casually mentioned needing a place to stay for a few weeks. "Would you be interested in staying at my place while I'm away on a work trip?" I typed. My tone was professional, matter of fact, no hint of emotion. "You'd be fully covered under a short-term sublease." Blake responded almost immediately. A rare occurrence in the world of workaholics. That would actually help a lot. Are you sure? I'm sure, I replied. Without hesitation, it was done. I moved on to the next task. The next morning, I visited the building office. Tanya, the property manager, greeted me like she always did. I liked Tanya straightforward, no nonsense. She handed me a printed packet with the building's policies, and I casually mentioned, I'm planning to be away for a couple of weeks and just wanted to confirm the policies around guests and temporary occupants. Tanya didn't bat an eye. We don't allow anyone to stay longer than 2 weeks without approval. Security will stop anyone not on the lease. No exceptions, even if they claim to be family. Perfect. I left the office with the confirmation I needed. The next few hours were spent drafting a formal sublease for Blake, one that I filed with Tanya that afternoon. Everything was legal, airtight. I scheduled a walkthrough of the apartment for the following evening. Moving all my personal items out of sight, I rented a small storage unit to keep things like journals, family heirlooms, backup hard drives, anything irreplaceable. By the time evening came, I had executed everything I'd planned. Every detail, from the sublease agreement to the building's approval, was in place. The apartment was now officially spoken for by someone else. My family wouldn't be able to touch it. That night, I received a message from Tessa. Should I bring my own bed or just use yours? I stared at the text for a moment, weighing my response. My hands itched to fire back something sharp, but I couldn't risk it. Not yet. I had bigger plans. So I replied with something vague, something that would keep her at arm's length for a while. Still sorting out logistics. Let's talk next week. The next few days passed like a quiet game of chess, every move calculated, each response delivered with precision. My parents sent texts asking about parking arrangements, shelf space, closet clearing, all under the assumption that I was preparing for Tessa's arrival. I replied when necessary, keeping it brief, allowing them to mistake my silence for consent. Wednesday evening, Blake arrived. I walked him through the apartment, handing over the keys and explaining the situation carefully. If my family shows up, I said, you don't have to explain anything. Just let them know you're the legal occupant during this time. Blake raised an eyebrow. That bad? They mean well, I said, a small bitter smile playing on my lips, but they don't listen. This is the only language they understand. Blake nodded slowly. Don't worry, I've dealt with people who assume they own what isn't theirs. By Friday morning, I was packed and ready to leave. I bought a weekend ticket to a quiet hotel on the coast and requested remote work access through my job. Personal reasons, I wrote, keeping it minimal. By Friday night, I'd installed a security camera facing my front door. I gave Blake the access code and emailed the building office my travel schedule. Everything was logged, filed, and approved. I was ready. Saturday morning arrived. Crisp and clear, a perfect fall day in the Pacific Northwest. I woke in my quiet hotel room, 30 minutes from home, and checked my phone. 12 missed calls, 5 from my mother, 3 from my father, and 4 from Tessa. The last text, time-stamped, 10:45 a.m., read, "We're almost there. Don't make this difficult." At exactly 11:03 a.m., my security app pinged, motion detected. I opened the feed and watched in real time. There they were, my parents and Tessa, standing outside my apartment door. My father knocked with growing force. My mother rang the bell again and again. Tessa stood behind them, talking on her phone, gesturing with increasing frustration. Then, the door opened. Blake stepped into view, coffee mug in hand, calm as sunrise. He said something I couldn't hear, but the way my father leaned forward and then recoiled told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't expected to see a stranger. My mother froze, one hand pressed to her chest. Tessa's face collapsed into disbelief. Moments later, a security officer appeared, arms folded, explaining protocol. My father pulled out his phone, likely trying to escalate things with the building management, but it didn't work. They were escorted to the elevator without setting foot inside. I sat back in my hotel room, numb, watching it all unfold. My phone exploded with messages. My father's voicemail came first. "This is unacceptable. That man is not authorized. We'll be contacting your landlord." My mother's message was almost hysterical. "Sabine, how could you humiliate us like this? Your sister is heartbroken. She has nowhere to go." Tessa's text was pure fury. "You're a monster. You didn't even tell me. You blindsided us. I hope you're proud of yourself." I muted the phone. It was all predictable. They were spiraling, unraveling at the seams, and I hadn't even needed to be there. I was letting them feel the weight of their own decisions. Blake called shortly after, his voice amused. "They tried everything. Your dad claimed you forged the paperwork. The security reminded him that's a criminal accusation. He shut up after that." I thanked Blake again, appreciating his calm through all of this. "Are you still okay staying there?" he asked. "Absolutely," I replied. "They can pound on the door all they want, it's locked." Later that night, my phone lit up with more messages. The anger had shifted to emotional bait. My mother sent a photo of Tessa sitting on our parents' couch, surrounded by boxes. "This is what your stubbornness has done," my mother wrote. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the more unhinged messages to my friend June, a paralegal who had agreed to keep a record of everything in case things got ugly. "They're spiraling," she texted back, "which means it's working. Hold your ground." That night, I muted every thread except for work and Blake. The rest could wait. I lay in bed, not shaking, not crying, just breathing. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone's daughter or sister or fallback plan. I felt like myself. Monday came with silence. Not peace, just the kind of silence that suggests regrouping. My phone barely lit up until noon when my father sent a text. "Rachel's furniture is sitting in a rented moving truck. It's costing us daily fees. What do you suggest we do with it?" Not a word of apology, not even a hint of understanding. I didn't answer. By 3:00 p.m., a voicemail from my mother arrived. It was more composed this time. Tessa could just stay for 2 weeks. She said, "We can pay you rent if that's what this is about." Family helps family, that phrase again, as if this had ever been about money. I didn't respond. But I knew something now. By the time I returned to the city, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. But it wasn't just any kind of peace. It was the peace of knowing that I had stood my ground. For the first time, I had not been afraid to enforce my boundaries. When I walked into my apartment, it felt different. It wasn't just the smell of lavender and clean sheets that Blake had left behind, or the neatly organized space. It was the knowledge that I had reclaimed something that had always been mine to begin with. I wasn't the daughter who made herself small anymore. I wasn't the sister who always played the role of the understanding one. I wasn't the one who would quietly bend to everyone's will for the sake of keeping the peace. No, that Sabine was gone. The next few days were quieter than I expected. I'd assumed the fallout from the weekend would be loud, emotional, but it wasn't. The silence stretched out between us like a chasm, growing wider with each passing hour. My parents seemed to retreat into themselves, unsure of how to fix what they'd broken. I went to work, focusing on the projects I loved, the environmental restoration projects, the wetlands I had helped to protect. They were my escape, my grounding. But the world outside was still pulling at me. My phone buzzed constantly, missed calls from my mother, voicemails from Tessa, and texts, so many texts. I had to admit, part of me felt a little guilty. I wasn't a monster, but the guilt wasn't strong enough to make me go back on my decision. It was Thursday when I got the call. My grandmother, the one person in my family who had always seen me for who I was, not for the role I was expected to play. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "I know things are rough with your parents. I understand that. But Tessa's been having a hard time. She's always been so lost, you know, and I think she could really use your support right now. She needs you." I didn't know what to say at first. Of course, I understood where she was coming from. I knew my sister had gone through a lot, and I wasn't blind to her struggles, but my grandmother wasn't here in the thick of it. She didn't know how my parents had treated me for years. She didn't know how they'd manipulated me into being the one to pick up the pieces every time Tessa stumbled. Tessa has a way of making everything about her. Grandma, I said, my voice quieter than I intended, and I've spent enough years cleaning up her messes. I'm not doing it anymore. I could feel my grandmother sigh through the phone. I know you've been strong, Sabine, but sometimes the strongest ones need to learn how to soften. It's not about giving in, it's about showing up in a way that lets everyone know where the line is. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, but I didn't respond. Instead, I let the silence speak for me. Eventually, she spoke again. Just think about it. I'm not asking you to fix everything. Just think about it. I promised her I would, but I already knew my answer. The next day, my father called. His tone was different this time, measured. A little apologetic. Sabine, he began, we're looking at apartment listings for Tessa. I just wanted to know if you're ready to talk about what happened. I could feel my heart beat a little faster, but I remained calm. I'm glad you're helping Tessa look for a place, but I'm not ready to discuss it yet. There it was again, the transactional tone, as if this was some business deal and not a matter of boundaries and respect. They didn't understand. They still didn't get it. I'll be back in town tomorrow, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I'll meet you on Saturday afternoon, but there's no need to discuss it further until then. No explanation, no apology, just clarity. That was all I owed them. Saturday came, and I knew it was time to face them. I arrived early at the coffee shop, one of those neutral spaces where memories can't cling to the walls. I sat at a corner table, taking in the steady hum of the crowd around me. It was quiet, almost peaceful, a stark contrast to what I was about to face. My parents arrived first, composed but cautious. Tessa followed behind, quieter than usual. Her face was unreadable, the usual sharpness gone. My father began, his voice tight with impatience. Sabine, I think you owe us an explanation for what happened last weekend. I took a deep breath, keeping my tone calm. Actually, we need to talk about why you made decisions about my apartment without involving me at all. That stopped them. They couldn't deflect this time. There was no way to twist it. Sabine, we didn't mean to, my father started, but I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. I'm not interested in excuses, I said firmly. I'm asking you, would you have done the same if it were Dylan's apartment? The room seemed to freeze. The question hung there, weighted with truth. Tessa shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes briefly flicking to my father, who was suddenly silent. I didn't know they hadn't talked to you, Tessa finally said. Breaking the tension, she looked right at me, her eyes wide with realization. I'm sorry. Sabine, that wasn't okay. I nodded, the words I had been wanting to say for years finally leaving my lips. Thank you for saying that. My parents looked at each other, the realization finally settling in. There was no more room to deny what they had done, no more excuses to justify their actions. We talked, not to fix everything, not to make it all right, but to start unpacking it. I told them what I needed. I told them that I needed to be treated like an adult, not a fallback plan, that my boundaries weren't optional. I wouldn't keep pretending silence meant agreement. We didn't fix everything in that conversation, not by a long shot, but it was a start, a painful, necessary start. Before we left, my mother reached out not to hug me, but to place her hand beside mine on the table. It was awkward, but there was something there, a small step forward. We didn't mean to push you out, she said softly. We'll try to do better. I believed her, maybe not completely, but enough. That night, I returned to my apartment, same walls, same light, same couch, but everything felt changed. I had changed. The apartment wasn't just where I lived anymore. It was proof that I could choose myself, even when no one else did. It was proof that I didn't have to be the one who bent. It was my space, and no one would take it from me. The next few weeks were quieter. The aftermath of the weekend still lingered, but I felt a shift in the air, a slow, gradual shift. My family was trying. They didn't understand everything. Not yet, but they were trying. And so was I. I began to research family therapists in the area not for now, but for later, if they ever wanted to rebuild something real, if they wanted to understand what they had done to me and why I had to set such firm boundaries. But that would be their choice, not mine. I would not be defined by them anymore. I had learned that the quietest kind of revenge wasn't rage, it wasn't humiliation, it was just living well, setting boundaries, and not allowing anyone to cross them without consequences.